Hey folks, I'm Spencer, and on today's episode of Cult Mania we're getting into some religious spooky times with Saint Maud. Saint Maud is the feature debut for Rose Glass, who also wrote the script for this. The film follows Maud, played by Morphe Clark, who was a sort of hospital nurse, but she's now transitioned into being a live-in palliative carer. And she's recently moved in to look after a former dancer played by Jennifer Ehle. But more importantly, Maud is a sort of born-again Christian. So everything she does is through the lens of trying to please God. You know, she's a carer because she thinks that is what God has given, you know, that's her purpose in life. But it's also impacting literally every tiny decision that she makes, no matter how that might upset other people around her. And I don't really want to go into the plot any more than that, because this is very much a character study. It's a film about, you know, seeing Maud develop and change, so I don't really want to spoil too much. Also, in terms of spoilers, I'm not going to put too much of the trailer for Saint Maud in this review, because I watched the first trailer when this was first announced, and it was going to come out obviously way last year. It's got quite a lot of the big bits from the film in it, so be careful. If spoilers are a problem for you, don't watch the trailer. Just go into it.
How long have you been doing this?
Just over a year.
What were you doing before?
I worked in a hospital.
As I said, this is pretty much a character study, and I'm struggling to think if there is a scene at all in which Maud isn't there. It's pretty much told from her perspective. She narrates part of it through sort of her prayers to God. So it's very important that Morphe Clark is very good in this film. Which she is. She's fantastic in this. Because it's, you know, like I said, she's on screen the entire time, really. So you have to be invested in her, otherwise the film doesn't work. And she goes through a lot of, you know, different emotional states throughout the film, so she has to balance them all perfectly. And she does, because there are times that you won't like Maud. There are times where you'll be like, that's a bit weird, don't do that. But also, she can be funny and likeable, and you can, you know, easily empathise with her. I mean, a lot of that comes down to Rose Glass's script managing to always be pitched at the right level. It's a film that lets you interpret things how you want to, but it never feels underwritten. It sort of perfectly balances giving you room without not writing it, which I think some films that try to do that do. Also, Morphe Clark does fantastic things. You know, she's a very physical performer. I'm pretty sure she's been on stage before, and I think you can tell because there are some more sort of surreal, horror-y sequences where it's all about how she moves, and she does that incredibly well.
Dear God, your presence graces the air, and soon everyone will see.
Now, I'm not trying to say that there aren't other standout performances in the film. Jennifer Ehle is really good. She's manages to balance being, you know, fragile. She's playing someone who's dying of cancer slowly, but she's still, you get the sense that she's weak, but you also get the sense that there's a lot of passion in her. You sort of get to understand who she was before everything was going on. And to be honest, there isn't a bad performance in the film. It's just that many of the other characters that turn up are in 1 or 2 scenes. You aren't getting to know them in the way that you are Maud. The film's cinematography is incredibly moody. Cinematographer Ben Fordsman has shot the film in widescreen, and despite how, you often think widescreen, big, open expanses, he manages to make the film feel incredibly claustrophobic. Something that you would usually use like Academy aspect ratio or 4:3 to sort of tighten everything in. But it does this through the camera can often be sort of very, very pulled back. You get a lot of shots where it's sort of in the corner of a room, sort of like almost like a sort of God's eye look. It's looking down on the action, and this often means that an entire room is captured in the frame. But rather than that feeling sort of expansive, it makes it all feel very tight. Sort of everything is bundled into the frame, and that means that as well sometimes you'll go from those sort of pulled back wides to really close up on people, and it just builds this sort of intensity, that claustrophobia. That's not to say there aren't moments where these sort of wide angles aren't used for sort of, pulled back very far, but they're used more for showing, Maud out on the seafront by where she lives, and she's so small and isolated. And I think it's that juxtaposition that makes those moments hit, because if it was always that she was tiny in the frame, it would almost feel like a gimmick, but I think it just sort of hits you more because you are jumping between those elements. The film also uses colour really, really well. This is a very, very contrasty film. There are times when there are blacks on screen and they are so black, and shadows can like bisect people's faces. There are, one of the key colours in the film is orange, and orange is a very difficult thing to use in film because it often can come across as very warm and very sort of comforting. Here it manages, because it's so contrasty, it's so almost sort of deep and dark, it feels uncomfortable. It's like, rather than being warm, it's like burningly hot, and that goes for many of they're pushed so far that they just feel uncomfortable.
May the Lord bless and keep you joy.
The sound design in the film is also very, very uncomfortable. A lot of the sound in the film is very heightened. There are points where people are walking, people turn taps on. There's a bit where someone like sucks on a cigarette, and it's so loud in the mix. It's so clear, you hear like every element of all of these sounds, and they are really quite distressing because you're hearing them much louder than you think you would. It really does just sort of, it's unpleasant in a good way. This is backed up by a wonderful, strange experimental score by Adam Yanato-Bezowski. It's a score filled with these strange, reverberating, discordant sounds, just odd sounds that you don't go, that's that instrument. Just sort of like weird, like things being like tapped or dropped, or like sort of, that sounds stupid. But I mean, there are times when you'll go, oh, that's strings, but they've been sort of electronically messed with so that they sound weirdly hollow or distant. There are electronic sort of drones that underpin these sort of odd, weird sounds. It most reminded me of sort of Mika Levy's work on something like Under the Skin or Monos, and I use that comparison with the sort of highest amount of respect, and those are some of the most interesting, fantastic scores that have been around in the last few years. So to be compared with those is, that is high praise. It's one of those films where I don't want to say that it would be like half the film without the score, because that undermines so much of the brilliant work that's going on elsewhere. But I do think it really, really hammers home this sort of uncomfortable, strange tone. I think, that strange, really intense tone that St. Maud has is one of the reasons, is actually probably the most important thing about it. Because it doesn't, if you read a bunch of the key scenes in this film, you wouldn't necessarily think it was a horror film. There are many points in this in which mundane, normal things are happening. It's not a sort of rip-roaring, scare-a-minute sort of film. It feels, in places, like I said, it's a character study. There are elements of more of a psychological thriller rather than a horror film. I'd be tempted to call it horror adjacent, in the way that some people talk about The Witch as it's not a full horror film, it's sort of got horror-y vibes, but it's more of a drama. But it is a horror film because it's horrible, it's unsettling, scary, does work. It has that. It's just, I don't know. This isn't The Conjuring set in a seaside town. It's not Boo Haunted House, scary. It's really something that sort of gets under your skin, sort of rocks your foundations. It's much more sort of existential than it's psychological horror. I think if you wanted to compare it with other films, I think there is more than a touch of the 2018 version of Suspiria. Not only because you have a dancer character and there are some scenes of dance, but I think it has that sort of cold tone. Some of the sort of body movements have that element to it. I think the sort of unsettling normality invokes some of the sort of early scenes in something like Kill List, where you're being confronted with the real world, but there's just this underpinning of unsettled nature to it that you can't quite put your finger on. And credit to my dad, who watched it with me and sort of said that it reminded him of Martyrs. Not in that it's a gory, horrible endurance test, but in its sort of that religious, existential feeling that it has. It definitely invokes that. So good on you, Dad. That was a good point. But whilst comparing it to these films is good for, you will know whether you want to see it based on what I've just said, it very much stands as its own thing. Rose Glass has made a Rose Glass film, from what I can gather. I'm very excited to see what she's going to do next, because it feels like St. Maud. It feels like its own thing that just has these inflections from other places, but does its own thing with them. And I think, that's one of the most important things. That is bolstered by having such a dedicated lead performance. But no, I was incredibly impressed by the film. I don't think it's going to be for everyone, because it's very downbeat. I think there's a lot of the reviews that are like, it's terrifying. It's a, damn. I was expecting it to be on the front. I've seen a lot of reviews saying that it's like one of the scariest films. It has that element to it, and I think obviously if it does that for you, fair. But I think labelling it as just purely scary does it a disservice, because I think the wrong audience might watch it. It is, like I said, it's a character study with some deep psychological themes. There are some very specific political themes I noticed that I think will work very well in Britain. I'm curious as to see whether they'll work as well in America. It's really, really good. Oh, don't watch it if you need a good night's sleep. Not because it'll keep you up because you're scared. I'm really tired. I spent most of last night trying to unpack concepts and images, and things kept coming back to me every time I'd wake up. It's definitely one I think that's going to benefit from a second watch, probably a third and a fourth, because there are little details that I'd love to know how they add up. Things that you notice later on, you think, "Oh, I wonder if that was foreshadowed or whether that links to that." So yeah, but it's a really, really impressive film, and anyone who's in the mood for a sort of dark horror experience, it's an experience, should definitely check this out. But that is just my opinion. Have you seen St. Maud yet? What did you think of it? Are you excited for the next Rose Glass film whenever that appears? Let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos. And I shall see you next time.